Our candidates to tonight's debate, to my left is the Democratic candidate for First Selectman, Waterford, Beth Sabilia.
Evening. Thank you.
You could applaud that part.
Thanks.
And to my right, the Republican candidate for First Selectman, Brule. Okay, we had a coin toss before we got started, and as a result of that, we're going to begin with Brule giving his opening statement, and you have 90 seconds.
Good evening, friends and neighbors. It's a privilege to be here tonight. I want to thank the Day and Paul Chenier for hosting the debate, Waterford High School for the use of this great auditorium, and Beth for agreeing to have a discussion. My name is Brule, and I'm the Republican Party candidate for First Selectman, and I'm here to discuss the future direction of our great town. A lifelong resident of Waterford, I'm one of 4 children who came from a middle-class working family that has always lived in Waterford and believes strongly in community service. My dad was a retired United States Coast Guard Academy senior chief, while my mom worked the 3 to 11 shift at the emergency room at Lawrence Memorial Hospital. For my part, I have served on boards and commissions in town since 1990. I have dedicated my entire 30-year professional career to working with people with disabilities. After work, I was the longtime soccer coach here at Waterford High School for the girls team that won a state championship in 2013. When my good friend and mentor, Dan Stewart, asked me 4 years ago to serve with him on the Board of Selectmen, I was humbled by the request to serve and honored the citizens of Waterford elected me. Over the past 14 years, I admired how Dan committed himself full-time to the position of First Selectman. And like Dan, I too intend to commit 100% of my time to the position of First Selectman. The citizens in this great town deserve all of me. I am proud of what we as a town have accomplished so far. I know firsthand where we were and what we need to do over the next 4 years to assure
you could wrap up,
future
Mr. Brule.
prosperity. Thank you.
The time. Thank you. Beth Sabilia.
Thank you. Thank you to Paul Chenier, the Day, Waterford Public Schools, friends, neighbors, family, for coming out this evening. My name is Beth Sabilia, and I am the Democratic candidate for First Selectman of the town of Waterford. It would be my great honor to serve you in this time of change. Waterford has faced significant change since I grew up here on Fillmore Drive, playing on Kitty Beach. The superintendent of schools recently said 1/4 of all students in our public school system are on free or reduced lunch. They're nearing 1/3, he said. The Waterford we knew has changed. The Waterford that we see in the future will be changing. I am particularly equipped to handle leading us into the future and accomplishing change that benefits all of the residents of Waterford. I'm an attorney by practice. My municipal history is significant. I have served 2 terms on the RTM, proudly representing the 3rd District of Waterford. I spent 4 years on the Board of Finance representing the entire town of Waterford. I have served 2 terms as the mayor of the City of New London, 6 years on the City Council. I've been on the New London Housing Authority, and I was the president of the Board of Education, where I served for a term. It would be my honor to serve you, and I look forward to telling you about my ideas.
Thank you. And I could just, and hopefully that's the last applause till we're at the end. I would just tell the candidates, I know I'm kind of set back between you. I won't be offended if you keep your eyes out there on the camera in the audience, because that's who's important. So no offense taken if you're not looking at me. I know it's strange not to look at someone and ask a question, but that's our format. So we're going to get started with the questions, and we begin with Mr. Brule. You take the first question. And I received a few emails from folks in Waterford, and this one question is the one that came in most frequently in one fashion or another. Do you agree with the proposal to create a townwide fire department under the direction of a director of fire services?
Um, It's a great question because it's been on the books in the town of Waterford for about 15 years now. The town of Waterford is blessed to have some of the best volunteer firefighters and paid firefighters we could ask for. Where we're going right now with volunteerism, where it's at, I've coached a long time, so I know even getting coaches to coach Little League is difficult. But when you start talking about saving people's lives, professional standards, federal standards that need to be met by all of our firefighters, it starts becoming a little bit more complicated. So in terms of the public fire department, it would be something that we need to make sure that we have trained, qualified professionals. We're working on the less amount of volunteers in our town. And I think when we make sure that we have the volunteers in place where they're listened to, that they're heard, that they have a place, they have time to actually get their training that they need, and that we require from them, we will be in much better shape moving forward.
Thank you. And you have 90 seconds to respond to the question.
Thank you. The charter change that made the Waterford Fire Department actually happened about 10 years ago. There is one Waterford Fire Department. What we have are 5 independent companies that are privately owned that provide service to the town. In exchange for that, the town pays for the equipment and to keep the lights on and training. What we've seen is our volunteer system upon which we were based has turned out to be inadequate. Last week when I was at a meeting, I counted 46 shifts that were unfilled in the fire department in 2 weeks. 46 shifts in 2 weeks. So we need to do something in order to ensure public safety. There's been an absolute vacuum of leadership on this issue. The RTM has had to take this as a legislative body to try and craft an ordinance to capture what should have been coming out of the executive branch, and that is, we have a problem. We need to study it and figure out how to fix it, which is what public safety did for the last 18 months. Now, what we're hoping to accomplish is unity of command between volunteer fire services, which is the core backbone of Waterford Fire Department, and paid professional staff. The paid professional staff is there to supplement and is there to lead us into making sure that we're safe, have the best practices, and comply with insurance requirements, all of which are not happening now. So it is my position that under unified command, we will see a force multiplier of volunteer fire department, of volunteer fire services, and that can use all of our town equipment.
Thank you. I get another 30 seconds to respond.
Sure. The fire ordinances are where they need to be right now, and that's the subcommittee of the RTM, the safety committee. That's where they need to be, that's where they are. There's no lack of leadership or discussion about it. They're right where they need to be. These firemen asked for, the volunteer firefighters asked for this a few years ago, and now they're getting the attention they need. So with that said, Jody and I went around town and met with officers and volunteers throughout the town in the fire service. They want these ordinances. They want standard operating guidelines and procedures. They want to know what to do and how to do it. And that's where it is right now, and that's where it needs to be, in this committee.
Thank you. Next question to Ms. Sabilia, and goes, I'm going to follow up on that. The firefighters and officers in these individual volunteer companies, I'm sure quite proud of the service they provide and the heritage of their different companies. What kind of independence and respect for that heritage do you see going forward if the town moves forward with the current plan? And you have a minute to respond.
That's an excellent question. As I mentioned, the fire companies are all private companies. They set their own rules and have their own members. There is nothing in the town's ordinance that prohibits the activities of the fire companies. I too met with volunteer firefighters for about 4 hours on one day. I met with the director of fire services. I've read the Blue Ribbon Commission on Volunteer Firefighters in the country. They state that unified command is the number one key to having a successful combination department. So no one wants to see Oswegatchie go away. No one wants to see Cohansey go away, and no one wants to change their culture. They're still private companies. They have every right to do that. What we're asking to do is that we have uniform training, uniform standards, and uniform equipment so that a firefighter responding can be responding up in Cohansey or down in Oswegatchie.
Thank you. Mr. Brule, if you could, you have 90 seconds, talk about concerns from these departments about the independence they've enjoyed under the existing system and how that might progress under these changes.
Sure. Listen, change is difficult for anybody, especially when you have an 80-year culture of a volunteer system in a town. This is not going to get fixed in a day. It's not going to get fixed in a week. As much as politically we may want this to be, it's not going to be. There's a lot of moving parts to the public fire service in our town, public safety. With that, what I'm looking to do and ensure is a responsible response time by trained firefighters in our town to respond to emergencies. This ordinance, with the bipartisan support under Tim Cogden's chairmanship, has spent the last 18 months working on this. So as it comes up today, 18 months later, as a topic of debate, I'm glad it's being talked about. I think nothing but good things are going to happen from this conversation because the Public Safety Committee of the RTM, that's representative of you, everyone here, is asking these same questions. The executive branch and myself as the first selectman is going to defer to this committee because that's what we do in this town. Representative government. That's how we listen, that's how we grow, and I will say once again, we have the best volunteers and paid firefighters in the state of Connecticut. Right now we're moving the right direction for ordinance that will allow us to remain safe and independent companies in a public department.
Thank you. Ms. Sabilia, you have another 30 seconds to sum up your thoughts on this.
The Public Safety Committee's been meeting for 18 months. Mr. Brule has not attended those meetings. There's interesting that it's not going to be fixed in a day or a week. It hasn't been fixed in 10 years. The reason for that is no one wants to take a stand and articulate a clear path of leadership. That's why we have a mess on our hands with our volunteers and our paid professionals. Nobody is leading the ship. And it's time somebody say, it's time for that to change. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to give Mr. Brule another 30 seconds. The question was raised, the allegation you haven't been attending the meetings. I wanted to give you a chance to respond if you so choose.
Sure. When it comes down to meetings, I read the meeting minutes. I make sure that I'm well versed on where are we going, what decisions have been made. In terms of this particular situation, when directors in town and employees in town are caught in the middle of politics, I just don't agree. Personnel decisions should be remaining personal and private, and no good comes from us looking at someone to blame. With that, I think we're going in the right direction now. We have great communication with our fire departments and our paid staff.
All right, thank you. Next question goes to Mr. Brule, came from our audience tonight. And the question was, Waterford being a town where it's 95 goes through the town of Waterford. There's been some highway issues on your border with East Lyme. And the question wants to know, what position would you take on tolls? It's going to be another debate in the legislature on tolls. I'm running for state office, but as a chief elected official, you obviously might have some influence in advising what you think our representatives should do. So beginning at 60 seconds, beginning Mr. Brule, your position on tolls if you were elected chief executive.
If I'm elected chief executive, I'm going to have no different stance on tolls as I do everything. I am a process-oriented person. I process information, and I talk to those that are elected with me, and I make sure I make a good, sound decision. If you ask me, do I agree with tolls, I'd say no. If you ask me if I feel it's in the best interest to put tolls in dangerous places on the highway, I'd say no. But I also know that I have to have a seat at the table, and I have to listen to other people. And I have to listen to the legislatures that say, this could be a good idea, we need it, we're going to do it. And I'd rather be on the side of listening and talking and having a discussion with the state of Connecticut for the most appropriate places if tolls do come in. But I do not support tolls. I have not supported tolls politically. I don't think the state of Connecticut can handle any more of these taxes, as you would call them, and tolls would just not do what I think the governor wants them to do. Thank you.
So, Ms. Sabilia, as first selectwoman, if so elected, what message would you be sending on tolls to our elected officials in Hartford? And you have 90 seconds.
I would say tolls are inappropriate. I don't support tolling in Connecticut. I'm very enthused that the legislature has met with the Federal Highway Administration, and they're talking about actually low-cost interest infrastructure loans where payment does not occur until after the road is completed. There are ideas out there. There are ideas out there. We need to explore them. I'm a small business owner. If I charge $250 for a will, think about how long it takes me to make a $1,500 health insurance payment. Think about how long it takes me to work in order to keep my staff employed. Those are the types of decisions that small business owners need to make, and make every single day. And not only do I make that decision, but I make it for my family. And every single cost that gets passed along, whether it be to me, Beth as an individual, or me, Beth as a business owner, it hurts. It hurts. It's become very, very expensive to maintain a standard of living in the state of Connecticut. And I'm a professional person. We have a third of our residents asset limited, income constrained in the town of Waterford. They're going to be hit the hardest with tolls. 95 is a mess. Tolling our way out of it isn't going to work.
Any more on this, Mr. Brule? You have another 30 seconds if you so choose.
No? Good.
Okay. All right, the next question, we begin with Beth Sabilia. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you're a former city councilor and former mayor of New London under the city council government. If elected Waterford first selectwoman, do you see any opportunities for more cooperation between the communities, and what might that look like?
I'm very proud of my service in New London. When I grew up here, my dad was a teacher at New London High. He couldn't afford to buy a house in New London, so he bought a house in Waterford and raised us here. So, and my mom too worked in medical as an x-ray tech. So, very humble beginnings in Waterford, very humble beginnings in New London when I came back as a new attorney. There is tremendous cross-pollination of ideas and people and cultures all throughout southeastern Connecticut. There is absolutely no reason why we cannot partner, whether it be with New London or East Lyme. Continue to build on the partnerships that we have. New London uses our radio system for its police. We're building a new, finally, animal shelter that will service New London, East Lyme, and Waterford. So we are moving in the right direction, but we need to do more in terms of culture and support. New London carries a tremendous burden for all of us. We should be thankful and welcoming to any and all ideas, wherever they come.
Thank you. Mr. Brule?
Yeah, growing up in New London for the first part of my young life, I lived on Gardner Ave. It's a great little place. The city has employed my dad, my mom. The art culture down there is something that I truly appreciate. Cities make the area vibrant and exciting. We have a great relationship with the city of New London. We have a history with New London. All this, you know, when I look back at mutual aid, for example, we talked about public safety just a short while ago. Not many of you know that we provide a great deal of mutual aid to the city of New London. So when we talk about public safety, and we talked earlier about fire services, We have over 200 mutual aid calls to New London. And I think with those numbers and what we do and the pride we take with our neighbors, we take pride in that. What I do think is there's a difference between, a little difference between New London and Waterford. And it's not bad reasons, it's just different. We have a much bigger, larger growth. We have 120 miles of road. We stem around them. And I think with those things, with our geographical location and having a good rapport with New London, and myself with Mayor Passero, who I've worked directly with over the last 4 years, I think only good things will come in the future with me being your first selectman.
Thank you. Another 30 seconds, Ms. Sabilia.
Just in terms of mutual aid, recently, unfortunately, we had a fire in Waterford. New London had to send a full crew with battalion chiefs. That's significant mutual aid. Now, we all have a problem when it comes to staffing ambulances and making sure that our elderly are protected. And mutual aid is one of those ways that we can do that. But we can also look at perhaps moving into a more regional dispatch center where calls are filtered and work together so that they know where they're dispatching these various ambulances, whether they're coming from the City of New London or from Waterford Ambulance Service. So that's one area where we can move ahead.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Brule. You're currently on the Board of Selectmen with Mr. Stewart, both members of the Republican Party. So do you see any changes in direction if you become first selectman, or is it more steady as she goes?
I'm very proud of the last 4 years and the body of work that Dan Stewart and I have done. I believe our communication with boards, commissions, committees, over 161 people volunteer in this town, in those boards, commissions, and committees. There's over 52 elected officials. 201 people volunteer their time to give back to this great town. Now, I say that because over the past 4 years, I've seen an increase of interest. I've seen communication between both sides of the aisle, because it's the only way we're going to move forward. By talking, by discussing, by bringing volunteers in that have a lot to offer. Now, with the case of Dan and I thinking a lot the same, we're very different as well. I bridge some generations. I believe I'm a very conservative person financially. I am. Deep in my soul, I am. But I think in terms of what we believe in, family, faith, in this community, I think we're very much alike.
Right. Thank you. Ms. Sabilia.
I have tremendous respect for our first selectman. I think he's a friend, he's a neighbor, he's somebody that I stood at the bus stop with. I have tremendous respect for the institution of the Board of Selectmen. But to say that there's a body of work upon which to rely is incorrect. I cannot point to one accomplishment that has made significant difference for the people in Waterford in the last 4 years. We've had a building committee disbanded, our roads continue to crumble, Millstone is a 1,000-pound gorilla in the room that nobody seems to be willing to talk about. Retail is crumbling before our eyes. Millstone and retail are number 1 and number 2 for taxpayers in Waterford. Millstone Dominion pays 1/3 of our tax base. So we're talking about the difference between a 29 mill rate as we stand right now and a 40 mill rate. This requires leadership. It requires action. It requires more than faith. And it requires more than being friends with people on committees. All of us have friends. Otherwise, we'd never be elected and we'd never want to serve. You have to have the heart and passion to do the right thing, even when it may not be easy. So there's plenty to do. There's vibrancy that needs to be restored to Waterford. We're losing our young people. Our aged are having trouble staying in place. And these are issues that we need to face.
Thank you. Mr. Brule, you get another 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, I would just respond by disagreeing with my opponent. I think we live in a great town. I think having a stable place to live is just a great thing. And it didn't just appear. There's been over 160 years of retirements in the last 10 years in this town. 160 years of institutional knowledge that has just gone. 48 years with the chief of police, 30 years with the planning director, 18 years with the human resource director. And I'm hearing my opponent talk about we haven't done anything. This town is thriving. This town's going to continue to thrive.
If you could wrap up. Just want to, so we are past the time. I just want to be fair, both candidates.
But next time I'll be able to finish the sentence.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
don't want. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Give you a little leeway, but it was going a little long, and I'll try to be fair to both candidates on that one. The next question begins with Beth Sabilia, and it was another one from the audience. It touched upon what we were just discussing now. I think you raised Millstone Power Station, and the question is given that there was great concern with Millstone, the fact it's such a big taxpayer, and it was talking about potential closure. Since then, the legislature has provided pricing relief to Millstone. The question then, given the changes, the legislative changes, do you still feel there's urgency to prepare for a life without Millstone, or has the town been given some time as a result of the legislative action?
Millstone is probably one of the most urgent, if not the most urgent, issue facing the town of Waterford. It is 1/3 of our tax base. If we don't start preparing now, we are going to be too late. When a merchant plant in Michigan shut down, that town could not afford to pay its health premiums for its teachers because it had not prepared. I've already spoken, and I believe the first selectman was at the meeting where I asked the Council of Governments if they would be willing to engage us in a regional economic development study to determine the highest and best use for Millstone and what Waterford would look like after Millstone. What will the region look like without 1,500 well-paying jobs? What will the region look like when we have a closed-up nuclear facility capped with concrete and hazardous waste there for life? We need to think about these things. Millstone perhaps could be repurposed. We may not even be able to imagine the energy uses that it may have in 10 years. That's why we need to engage. That's why we need to start to prepare.
Thank you. And Mr. Brule, where does the town stand or should stand on Millstone and the concern that has been raised about potential that it could close? We seem to have brought a window of opportunity with the legislative action, but an audience member wanted to know where do things stand now? Where would they stand on your administration?
Well, I think under my administration, I will continue to have open dialogue with the state of Connecticut and our state representatives, Kathleen McCarty, Holly Cheeseman, and State Senator Paul Formica. I'm in constant contact with the three of the legislators, one of which is here tonight, so I thank her for being here. I would absolutely make sure that we communicate with the state. I see Kevin Hennessy, the Director of Communications for Dominion, quite a bit through town. Every chance I get, every time I get a chance to talk to him, I do. But what's incredibly important is they're important to us, we're important to them. They're the most efficiently run nuclear power plant in the country. Most efficiently run, cleanest carbon-free emissions in the country. They're here in our town. I'm looking at them staying longer. I'm going to make sure I work with legislators to see if they can stay longer than 10 years. And in those 10 years, if I could just finish, in those 10 years, we're going to be working on saving money, not spending money, if that's what it takes. Okay? So thank you.
You have another 30 seconds to comment on this exchange.
Dominion has closed every single merchant plant it's bought, with the exception of Millstone. Let's take off the rose-colored glasses. It's a corporate decision. Once the contract with the state is no longer, or with the energy providers, is no longer financially feasible for its stockholders, they're going to start to close. And we can't leave it to chance meetings. We can't leave it to phone calls to friends. We need to engage the community. We need to fight this together. We need to determine our destiny. We can't just sit back and say we've got a 10-year deal and I'm going to make some calls. No, this needs to be deliberate. This needs to be a process. You all need to be engaged in it. That takes time. It takes effort, it takes leadership, and it takes experience at bringing people together, which is something I'm very proud of doing in the City of New London in terms of helping settle the Kelo case. If I could work on that case and seek a resolution, I am fairly certain that I can work with Dominion and welcome them.
Thank you. I think we might have lost our place, but I think it was a minute she was given, right? Do you want any, I could give you another 30 seconds because we lost a little track of time there. I think if you want to say any more, just to be fair, because I think.
Yeah, no, I just think, Millstone has been here for a long time, and they want to stay here a long time. And I'm not looking through rose-colored glasses either. We need to make sure we make good, sound financial decisions under my leadership to make sure that we put enough money aside to make sure that day comes, we're prepared for it. I'm a fiscal conservative person. I look at the dollars. I look at how much we need to save, and I'll continue to do that with the town of Waterford.
So the next question begins with Ms. Sabilia. She gets a minute. And let's stay on the topic of Millstone before we move on to some other topics. Got an email question from a reader who's concerned that Waterford's going to end up like Haddam Neck with Connecticut Yankee. Connecticut Yankee is long gone, but the high-level waste is still sitting in that town. Is there anything you can see as first selectman that Waterford can do? It's certainly a big federal issue, but to try to express concerns that Waterford may end up as a high-level nuclear waste storage area once that plant closes.
Certainly. As the chief elected official, I would certainly advocate to the federal government and to our representatives and congressmen that a federal solution needs to be found. We're not the only community that is going to be storing spent fuel. But we were made a promise that there would be a place to put that spent fuel, and there isn't. And I'm not particularly optimistic that this leadership in Washington, whether it be at the congressional level or at the executive level, is going to come up with a solution to that thorny issue right now. So what do? We keep the pressure on. How do we do it? By sitting at the table and ensuring that we're part of the discussion about the future use of Millstone, to make sure that we're not cut out by the state of Connecticut and Dominion, to insist that our taxpayers and our residents are protected in the conversations of how we decommission Millstone. It's going to happen.
Thank you. Mr. Brule, you have 90 seconds. Your thoughts on what, if anything, Waterford might do, but the fact we still don't have any solution to the nuclear waste issue.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question when you tell me that the federal government doesn't have the solutions, but you're looking at me for that solution, so I appreciate it. What I can tell you is this: we're going to communicate with our state legislators because we have to. They know more than we know. They have the information. When it comes down to storing nuclear energy, it's the safest plant in the country. It's been there. It's leaving tomorrow. It's contained. And if we ever had this worry or scare tactic, I can just reassure you that I went to the last advisory panel in the update, and they just invested $30 million into ensuring even more safety of stored units, of stored rods. So in terms of the safety, in terms of our community being safe, and what the plan is to do with that nuclear storage in the future, federally, it needs to be taken care of. We're going to rely on Joe Courtney and some other legislators, and maybe if Representative Dodd, make sure Mr. Murphy might get involved, get off of the internet and help us with those decisions. With the nuclear power storage issue, we'll be in much better shape. But this is a federal assistance type topic, and I will work diligently to make sure that we work with legislators to take care of that.
You have 30 more seconds on this question before we move on.
we're the ones that are going to be left with Millstone in our town. We're the ones that need to reckon with that future. We're the ones that need to sit at that table. And I will tell you, we're the ones that would be elected. It's not our state reps and it's not our state senators. I would be accountable. I would be accountable to know these things. You would be able to hold me accountable for this. And that's what we need out of our chief elected official. Somebody that's going to stand up and say, no, my people matter. They matter.
Thank you. Mr. Brule, next question. If elected, what message would you take to the Lamont administration concerning the future of the former Seaside Regional Center?
Well, that's a good question, because I just met with the governor a week and a half ago down in New London, and I did ask him that question. And I'm excited that we might be able to have some discussions with the state of Connecticut moving forward. The state of Connecticut, in their wisdom back in 2015, Governor Malloy in particular, 3 weeks before the election, decided to make Seaside a state park. 3 weeks before the election, he thought it was a good idea to make Seaside a state park without a plan. The first selectman in the town had a plan. Could not institute that plan because of Governor Malloy's rash decision to make Seaside a state park. Now, with that said, there is potential. The only potential that we have right now, what I believe, is sitting at the table with Kathleen McCarty, state representative, sitting at the table with the governor to say, private economic development, responsible private economic development can be an answer for our town with
All right.
Seaside.
Thank you. And you'll get another 30
Thank you.
seconds. 90 seconds, Ms. Sabilia, on the question of Seaside.
Just with respect to Seaside, my kids that are here tonight, they're probably mortified at 13 and 15 that I actually pointed out that they're here tonight. Their family actually was the first family to live at Seaside. Their great-grandfather was the superintendent at Seaside when it opened as a TB hospital. There's some heartstrings there. It's a beautiful building. There's sets of beautiful buildings. And we need to demand that the state stop demolishing them by neglect. That's what's happening to our beautiful coastal resource. I'm not sure I necessarily agree that it should remain a state park, but I certainly think it needs to remain open and accessible to the people of the town of Waterford and the state of Connecticut. And now the reason I say that is because when I lived in New London, coastal resources were very precious. You could not get from the street down to the beach. That's wrong. The coastline belongs to all of us. This is a wonderful asset that we need to, as a town, go back to the drawing board and go to the state and say, this is what we need you to do. Stop demolishing these buildings by neglect, clean up the site, and undertake a realistic study about what we're going to do to reuse the site. But it needs to stay open to the public.
Mr. Brule, you get another 30 seconds.
Sure. Seaside, there's a history in town. I used to work with the individuals down there that lived there. I had baseball practice down there with Tom Sullivan. The history is there. It's a beautiful piece of property that under Governor Malloy, who made it a state park without a plan, really put us behind the 8 ball. I'm willing to believe that Governor Lamont gives us a new chance to look at private, responsible development in that area where we can get tax revenue from that property, if at all possible. All the while making sure we discuss things properly with the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to give them each a minute follow-up question related to Seaside. We'll start with Mr. Brule and then to Ms. Sabilia. Any interest in doing what Preston did with the Norwich Hospital property and asked the state to turn it over to them, and they pursued what to be done with it? So
I didn't get the first part of your
if you as first selectman, have any interest in doing, Preston had the same sort of issue with Norwich Hospital property, in that it was owned by the state wasn't getting anything much done, and the Preston asked to take control of it, and they've pursued development opportunities. Just throw that out there, whether you would see any Waterford having any interest in following that formula.
Sure, as everyone knows me, I'm up for listening. All right, I try not to make quick decisions. I try to think about things, but I also know that if the state of Connecticut says we have a deal for you for that piece of property, I may be leery. I may listen, and I may have some ideas, but they don't have the money to invest in something like that. What I'm looking at for that property is least amount of traffic, least amount of impact on the area, with the most amount of ability to bring in some financial tax revenue that the town is going to need. I was asked by my opponent to think outside, to think a little bit clearer about the money that we're going to be losing with Millstone. This is one area that we can look at in town that we can develop some revenue for our tax base in a responsible, private manner. Thank you.
And you get a minute, Ms. Sabilia, on any thoughts on the Preston model of the town asking to take control of the facility?
I don't think the town of Waterford is financially equipped to take on the project of Seaside, quite frankly. We have other pressing issues. We have an unfunded pension liability. The Board of Selectmen cut over $1 million that I, on the Retirement Commission, and my commission members voted to fully fund that pension liability. So we're kicking the can down the road for pensions in our own town, at the same time screaming up in Hartford for saddling us as state taxpayers with that debt. It's wrong. So no, we don't have the money to do Seaside. The state came in, the state said it was a state park, and they solicited bids for developers. Zero developers expressed interest. Either the state asked the wrong questions, or there's a significant problem with the property that nobody's discussing. But we need to get to the bottom of it, and it needs to stop festering.
All right, thank you. Next question. And it begins with Ms. Sabilia, and you have a minute. We've seen other towns in the state and in our region take steps in the interests of the environment to ban plastic straws, bags. I know there's been steps in Waterford. I'm just wondering your opinion of that kind of grassroots approach to that environmental issue.
Well, I think your question, if I'm not mistaken, there's a grassroots approach, meaning that the consumers are demanding a choice or a different behavior. And then secondly, there are municipalities that are stepping up and doing more than what the state requires.
Correct.
Waterford should have been that municipality. We had in our committee for months the issue of single-use plastic bags. While we dithered around in committee, the state of Connecticut enacted a tax on those hideous bags. Waterford need not to enforce that. We can outright ban those bags from our town. Bags shouldn't grow on trees. Not only that, it's offensive that the town took that 10-cent per bag fee and put it right into the general fund. It has nothing to do with the environment, has nothing to do with recycling. It has nothing to do with LEED certification or best practices. So yes, Waterford should be a leader on this issue. If not us, then who?
Your thoughts, Mr. Brule?
Yeah, when I think about recycling, I think about each and every one of us playing a part. And I think regulating people more than they need to be regulated is better. I just think that way. I do believe that education, when we talked to the students today at the high school during our debate this morning, Beth and I talked about this as well. Do you believe that we should have been the leader of this ban? Well, it depends on what you ask, like how you're asking that question. I believe we needed to wait to see what the state decided to do before the town of Waterford enacted legislation and a ban that we may not be even able to enforce. So my stance back then, and it is now, was do everything we can as a town to educate people on the importance of recycling. You're all getting tags in the mail on your garbage cans this week because we are asking for your diligence as a community to make sure we are recycling properly, so you will see green tags. But with that said, we all have to do our part. We all have to make sure personally that we're doing our part to make sure that this environment is clean, and we do our part to make sure that plastics and any other non-recyclable materials or recyclable materials that we can get rid of safely, we do. So.
Thank you. Ms. Sabilia, you have another 30 seconds on that question.
Again, it's a missed opportunity for Waterford to lead. There's nothing wrong with leading. There's nothing wrong with being ahead of the pack. There's nothing wrong with doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Plastic bags are everywhere. Everywhere you look. My daughter was walking down the road and there was a plastic bag wrapped around a squirrel's hind leg, and she tried desperately to get it off. I go down the road and trees are sprouting plastic bags. This is what we see. Think of the amount of money we spend on keeping our beaches and our coastlines clean. This is one area where we should have led.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Brule. How will your ideology as a Republican shape your leadership if elected for a selectman?
Well, ideology is something very personal as well as political. I have personal views on many things. In terms of socially, I'm a very conservative person, but I also work with people with disabilities all my life. And I have a sensitivity to all people of all abilities. And when I think about my ideology, I don't fit your typical box. Conservatively, as a Republican, I look at budgets and I look at costs and I look at, can we do things a little bit more affordable? Can we look at things a little bit more efficiently? When it comes to social ideology, I'm pro-life. People have asked me, and I feel I need to tell people that. Now, do I make it a point to say anything more than that? No, because I value and respect anyone's decision they make.
Thank you. And you get 90 seconds. Obviously, in your case, how would your ideology as a Democrat shape your leadership as first selectman?
Okay. Actually, who I am has shaped my ideology rather than my ideology shaping me. I'm a school teacher's kid. My grandfather was a Teamster. My husband is a union pipe fitter. We have in our family people with mental health issues, people that are transgender, people that are interracial, biracial. They're all in our nuclear family. The Democrats tend to be a welcoming bunch. For better or for worse, once you join us, your family, I don't see that same level of empathy and compassion for your fellow citizen out of the Republican national ideology. Democratic ideology, on the other hand, when it comes to spending, it's interesting. Waterford is an interesting place. It's very much like where I was in Massachusetts. Democrats are socially liberal and fiscally conservative. Now, that may be odd, right? But the Republicans have been in charge in Waterford the last 20 years, and taxes have continued to go up. Budgets have continued to go up. Part of that is the natural progression of inflation, and part of that is really reorganizing where we are, making ourselves more efficient, looking to new ideas and not sitting back and waiting and seeing what we can do. It's actively going forward. And that's part of my ideology as well. I'm not a wait and seer. I will come to you if you will not come to me.
Thank you. You get another 30 seconds on this exchange if you want to add.
Sure. I'm probably the most approachable person here. If you know me, you know I have worked directly with people with disabilities all my life. I've advocated for my individuals that I work with and their families. I work with traumatic brain injury survivors throughout Connecticut. I work with soldiers coming back, combat veterans with the Wounded Warriors Project and the Independence Program. I do that because I care. I do that because it gives me joy to give back to those that need assistance and need a voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question goes to Ms. Sabilia, getting towards the end of our hour. So say you're elected first selectwoman, getting ready to take office. What are your top 2 or 3 priorities as you look forward to beginning your term?
First priority is going to be economic diversity for the town of Waterford. We really need to get a handle on where we're going. Where we've been is important, but where we're going is far more important. We need to engage people that haven't already been engaged. I see the same and hear from the same people. We need to broaden our conversations. We need to take stock of who we are. So that would be the first thing, is we need to look at economic diversity. What does that mean for us? Why are the majority of the manufacturers that supply EB down in Fairfield? Why can't we capture some of that energy? Second issue, our infrastructure is in desperate need of updating. We have a smart street plan that will allow for accessibility, access, biking, walking. We have public safety issues that we already talked about, so I'm not going to take time there. But I will say that education is vital to our community, and we will do whatever is necessary to support the continued excellence.
Mr. Brule, if elected, what's your top 2 or 3 priorities on day 1?
Priorities are our kids. Should always be our kids. They're the next generation, so education is something that, you know, I've always been a fan of supporting because we depend on them. We need them to be healthy, and we need them to go on and do great things. So I would support education. Social emotional learning is something that the town of Waterford, I'm proud that the curriculum has been in place now. As we know, there's a lot of stressors out there in the real world, and it's affecting all of us in every community. So I continue to prioritize on social emotional learning in the curriculum here to ensure that we have options and opportunities for our young adults to have a voice and to have an ear to listen to. I think economic development is something, and I think a Main Street. I think I've heard it throughout town that a Main Street would be pretty neat to have. We could do a lot with a Main Street. Now, I'm not saying, unlike my opponent who I think promised about 60 items and promises in her platform, mine was basically the feasibility of a Main Street. Is it feasible to have a Main Street in Civic Triangle? Is it? I don't know. Could we develop business? Could we have some central location in town where we can build off of, like other communities have? It's an idea for economic development that would base our energies in one area and build off of that.
Well, thank you, and you get the last 30 seconds on your ideas.
As the mom of 2 kids, stepmom of 2 kids, I always think kids come first. But in terms of priorities, we're not only a community of kids. We're not only a community of people that engage in the school system. I represent people that are old, that have lost their faculties, that have no one else. These are your neighbors too. There are 15 languages spoken in our public schools. Those are your neighbors too. They're our neighbors. We need to find a way to engage so that the priorities I discussed are meaningful and vibrant.
Thank you. All right, with that, we're going to be moving on to closing statements. I want to thank you for being a very, very respectful audience. I want to thank our candidates for doing a great job in discussing many of the issues in town. We don't always get to them all, but I think we got to a lot of them. Okay, again, by a flip of the coin before we began the debate, we decided the order of the closing statements. Each of our candidates will have 60 seconds, and we begin with Beth Sabilia.
Thank you.
Your closing statement.
Thank you. Thanks again to the League of Women Voters. Thanks for all of you for coming out in a rainy night to see us and be part of this. Listen, I believe I have the leadership skills to move Waterford forward. I believe I have the experience required to move Waterford forward. Waterford has changed. Waterford is changing. I also have the heart and the passion to lead the community forward. I'm not going to sit back and wait and see what happens. I'm going to come to you, and you're going to be part of the discussion, and you're going to help me. That's how we build a vibrant, sustainable community. One where everyone, whether it be those kids that speak one of those 15 languages, or one of those people that's taking free and reduced lunch, or somebody that's a union fitter, feels welcome. We want our firefighters to be able to rent in town. They can't do that now. That is not a vibrant and sustainable community.
Thank you. Rob Brule, 60 seconds.
I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to come out and be here this evening and be part of tonight's discussion. Infrastructure, economic development, education, customer service, which we didn't talk quite enough about tonight, will be our priorities. Jody and I will continue to support our seniors and our veterans, protect our natural resources, maintain and continue to build a stable tax rate, promote regional cooperation, and reaffirm a local government that is accessible, transparent, and responsive. Jody and I are prepared to lead a seamless transition into a new administration, committed to enhancing Waterford's quality of life, while laying the groundwork for continued prosperity in the future. And speaking of the future, earlier today, right down the hall actually, the youth of our town had the opportunity to participate in our Waterford High School first selectman debate this morning. And I am proud to say the students overwhelmingly voted for Jody and I to lead this great town. We hope you too, and will join us on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, and we can applaud our candidates now for tonight's debate.
Good job.